Investigative journalist Bethany McLean is out with a new book. It is sort of a definitive account of what went wrong and what went right during the pandemic, but a lot of what went wrong. For instance, how prolonged lockdowns, the one strategy that so many in the United States and elsewhere turned to, didn't work, bringing social and economic problems, fueling anxiety and fear. That fear, according to McLean, who will join us in a moment, is one of 3 reasons, she says, that blue states are unwilling to reopen schools. The second was Donald Trump. Partisan divide so toxic, as she puts it, if Trump thought schools should be opened, all the more reason to fight to keep them closed. The third was the teachers union, who were allies and contributors to the Democratic Party. Politics often trumped science, and since cable news doesn't really do nuance, it added to the problems. The book is critical of both Dr. Anthony Fauci and former President Trump, and also talks about things that they did right. And those on the state front, California Governor Gavin Newsom, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. There's no question the political divide grew wider during the pandemic. Everything became about politics. If you looked at social distancing as a life-saving measure, you were a liberal. If you weren't wearing a mask, you were a conservative. Everything became politicized. The book is called The Big Fail: What the Pandemic Revealed About Who America Protects and Who It Leaves Behind. Co-author Bethany McLean joins us now. Bethany, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go through your conclusions, and I want to go through it sort of player by player. Dr. Anthony Fauci, how did he do?
So I think a mixed bag. He obviously became a hero to many in the pandemic. It's come out afterwards how aggressively he pushed against critics, anybody who suggested lockdowns weren't the right measure, anybody who suggested that the virus could have come from a lab. He shut down debate in a way that I think is problematic in our society. At the very same time, if politicians didn't like what Fauci was saying, they shouldn't have put him in charge. And so one thing the pandemic revealed is how many leaders want to hide behind somebody else. And so our leaders hid behind Fauci. So if you don't like him, I think you should fault our politicians.
So let's talk about the politicians. Donald Trump, how did he do?
So I think mixed. I think it would be really convenient to look at the pandemic and say, if we had only had a different president, if we had only had somebody else in charge, America would have come through this unscathed or less badly scathed. And it's just, that's magical thinking, because in the first year of the Biden administration, the number of deaths from COVID was actually higher. And while they are 2 different time periods, obviously, it wasn't that easy to fix. If it were that easy to fix, a different president could have come in and waved a wand, and all the problems would have gone away. That said, I think the pandemic brought out many of the divides in the Trump administration that made it dysfunctional, and the pandemic showcased the dysfunction.
2 big state governors that you talk about with very different strategies, Gavin Newsom versus Ron DeSantis. Again, who wins in that battle?
Well, I think DeSantis wins in the initial phases of the pandemic. He looked at the data, saw who the pandemic was killing, and pushed to get his state open. And Florida's economic performance has been better than any place else in the nation, essentially. And he did a decent job protecting people, the elderly, in nursing homes. If you look now at the numbers when adjusted for age, Florida's death rate is a little higher than California's, but not that much. And Newsom's strategy of lockdowns at the same time left often the most vulnerable populations to fend for themselves while allowing the wealthy to hide at home and order their Amazon and their food service. And then Newsom himself was caught being a total hypocrite about it, right, when he was at that restaurant and caught inside without a mask on, eating with people.
So do you think, I mean, in retrospect, lockdown's mistake?
I think a mistake. I don't fault people for lurching toward them in the early stages of the pandemic when everybody was scared and the argument was we have to save the hospital system. But that argument morphed and nobody was ever clear what the end goal of lockdowns were. And in fact, most dangerously, there was this view, if you just lock down hard enough, COVID will go away. Well, hello, China. How did that work out? It obviously didn't. And there was no real basis in the science for lockdowns. In fact, this incredibly prominent epidemiologist, larger than life giant in the field named D.A. Henderson, who we write about, had not wanted to do lockdowns. He had said they don't work. You have to do something as mitigation that a society can tolerate.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.